the value of money, can be guaranteed by gold? What? Does gold still have any monetary role today? Wasn't it true that gold is a barbaric relic, as the famous economist Keynes called it? And how did we get from gold coins to credit cards? Hello everyone, I'm Marcel Debus. Welcome to my channel. Los geht's! Our money is no longer backed by collateral. The dollar is just paper and ink. There is nothing of much value in the material itself, and even banknotes and coins are now increasingly out of circulation. But our confidence is so deep that we are just as happy with the balance in our bank account. But that was not always the case. For centuries, people used precious metals as money or paper notes backed by precious metals. Unbacked fiat money, which cannot be converted into gold or silver and can be produced in unlimited quantities, only became widespread worldwide in the 20th century.
Gold is a currency. It is still, by all evidences, the premier currency where no fiat currency, including the dollar, can match it.
There are still a few economists today who believe that only gold can be real money because it has unquestionable intrinsic value. And this is partly true, as the metal has many positive qualities. It doesn't corrode, it never wears out, it's easy to mold, and of course, it's beautiful. It is not only used in jewelry but also in industry. There are also a few milligrams of it in the device you are using to watch this video. But it would be foolish to think that the high price of gold today is only due to these practical properties. Gold is not valuable in the same way that a loaf of bread is valuable to feed you, a coat you can put on and keep you warm, or a house you can come home to. The value of gold comes mainly from the fact that it is rare and that people accept that it is valuable. This collective belief is supported by thousands of years of history and culture. People have always been fascinated by gold. The pharaohs lined their tombs with it in ancient Egypt. The Incas revered it as the sweat of the sun. The alchemists were obsessed with producing it, and our Olympic champions get gold medals, or at least a silver medal covered in gold. People have used a lot of different things as money throughout history: shells, squirrel skins, grain and rice stones. But the reign of precious metal coins lasted the longest and was the most widespread. Later, paper money appeared, which could be exchanged for a given amount of gold or silver at the bank, so that in theory, there could only be as many banknotes as there were gold and silver in the bank. By the way, which metal has been the dominant money in the world? Silver or gold? If you believed it was gold, you are sadly mistaken, because before the 19th century, silver was the basis of money in many more countries. Gold took over in the 30-40 years before World War I, when most European countries, including Russia and the US, switched to the gold standard. This period marked the golden age of the classical gold standard. So what did that era look like, which many people look back on with romantic nostalgia? The features of the system were as follows. In addition to gold coins, there were also banknotes in circulation that the central banks were obliged to exchange for gold coins or bullion at the request of the holders, in the amounts indicated on the banknotes. There were also different national currencies in the gold standard era: the pound sterling in the United Kingdom, the dollar in the USA, the Deutschmark in Germany, and the krona in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, were all worth a certain amount of gold. For example, a dollar was equal to 1.5 grams of gold, a pound was equal to 7.3 grams of gold, and a krone was equal to 0.3 grams of gold. This meant that the exchange rates of the currencies were very stable. Let's look at an example. In the UK, the Bank of England gave £136 for a kilo of gold. In the USA, a kilo of gold was $665. These were the official exchange rates guaranteed by the state, and it follows that £136 was worth $665, so £1 in the United Kingdom was equal to 4.9. This exchange rate between the two currencies was guaranteed by the gold standard, and so it was that for 40 years between 1870 and 1910, the dollar to pound exchange rate remained the same. Of course, the stability of the exchange rate was super because it made international trade predictable, and thus facilitated it. Also, the price level was relatively stable, meaning that average inflation was low during this period. Inflation was held back by the fact that the quantity of gold did limit money creation to some extent. Of course, in each country there was far more paper money issued than gold reserves in the central bank, but the amount of gold did represent a constraint, at least for a while, until a worldwide crisis, the First World War, when everything fell apart. States were no longer interested in the quantity of gold. They started printing banknotes to finance the war, and convertibility ceased, meaning that money could no longer be exchanged for gold. The result was that after the war, inflation ran out of control in many countries, for example, in the Weimar Republic. Although governments tried to return to the gold standard after the war, this was only half successful, and the Second World War came. As World War II drew to a close, the Allies decided to create a new financial system. This system was to be called Breton Woods, named after the small town where representatives of 44 countries met to negotiate. Under the Breton Woods system, the US pegged the dollar's value to gold and agreed to exchange dollar notes for gold at the request of other countries' central banks at $35 per ounce. Then, the saying, "the dollar is as good as gold," began to spread. Other countries promised to keep their national currencies pegged to the dollar. This system worked for a while, but the cracks started to show. Other nations began to suspect that more dollars might be in circulation than the US had gold, and they tried to redeem their dollars. The system collapsed a few days after France sent a ship to New York to take its gold home. Of course, it wasn't just that, although it's a pretty good story that a cruiser parked in front of the bank and the system collapsed. Still, this move by French President Charles de Gaulle was just one nail in the coffin of the gold standard.
I have directed the Secretary of the Treasury to take the action necessary to defend the dollar against the speculators. I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets, except in amounts and conditions determined to be in the interest of monetary stability and in the best interest of the United States.
Since then, the dollar has become a fiat currency, and all promises of convertibility have disappeared from banknotes. But strange as it may seem, the world has not collapsed. Sure, the dollar has plummeted and gold has appreciated. Still, somehow the world has let go of its attachment to gold surprisingly seamlessly. No country has a gold standard today, but 20% of the world's gold, 33,000 tons, is still held in vaults by central banks worldwide. The countries with the largest gold reserves today are, in order, the USA, Germany, Italy, France, Russia, and China. But if gold is no longer needed to back the money, why are central banks still holding it? To do this, we must first understand why the central bank has any reserves. Central banks hold not only gold, but all sorts of other assets. For example, other nations' currencies, typically dollars, euros, and yen, and other countries' government bonds. These reserves are needed, for example, to enable the central bank to influence the exchange rate of its own national currency or to intervene in a crisis. Still, holding foreign exchange reserves or government securities for these purposes is more practical. They are more liquid, accessible to sell and monetize, and of course because they do not have to be paid for storage, but gold does have a more specific role. I think we all feel that if Armageddon broke out, our civilization completely disintegrated. Dollars and euros could quickly become worthless in our eyes, while gold would still be accepted as payment when there were no more countries, no more central banks, no more tax authorities, and half the world was destroyed. The brutal gold buying of recent years by the various central banks has generally been explained by the soaring global sovereign debt or the emergence of inflation fears, further reinforcing gold's role as a safe haven and store of value. So when a central bank says that gold is a safe haven asset and a store of value, it talks about gold holding its value during crises, and typically appreciating it during a crisis. When many investors preparing for Armageddon start buying gold, the fact that gold is not at risk of bankruptcy plays a role. By that, we mean that while, say, in the case of government bonds, the issuers of government bonds, the states, can go bankrupt, or, say, in the case of equities, the companies can go bankrupt. Gold is not at risk of that. Gold is also helpful in diversifying reserves. Russia, for example, began converting its dollar reserves into gold in the run-up to the Ukraine war precisely to reduce its dependence on the United States. But when someone says that the value of money is guaranteed by gold, that is not directly true. the central bank can temporarily raise the exchange rate of its own currency by buying its own currency on the market in exchange for its reserves. Part of those reserves is gold, which can be appreciated in a crisis. What do you think? Do you think the world was a better place when there was a gold standard? Does central bank gold buying make sense? Let me know in the comments down below. And of course, thanks for watching my video. Subscribe and like if you enjoyed it. I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Bye.